Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask a Witch. My name's Katrina Rasbold, and I've been a practicing witch for almost 40 years. For the last 10 years or so of that, I've worked professionally doing spell work, readings, and cleansings for my clients, and also teaching classes. And I've had a lot of questions come my way, and I figure if somebody in my community is asking it, maybe y'all want to know too. So that's why I do this series. And this week's question is one that I get asked quite a bit, actually, especially by people that are just coming into witchcraft or coming into to Wicca, and they want to know: do y'all work naked or in the nude, and do y'all have wild orgies with your ceremonies? So that always seems to be a big thing on people's minds, both out of curiosity and a little bit of exotic excitement over the idea, and sometimes about hesitancy of, I'm not completely sure I want to be a witch if that's what's going to be going on. So what I will tell you is that absolutely yes, there are groups that work. It's called Skyclad, working nude, and that's part of their spirituality. And in some ways, it strips away rank and classism. It also is very freeing. And so there are groups that do work Skyclad, but I'm going to tell you, out of 40 years of being a witch, there aren't that many that do. The most of them are Wiccan, not witches. Well, that's inaccurate, actually, because Wiccans are witches, but not all witches are Wiccan. And so when you're looking at working in the nude, it's usually going to be Wiccans who are doing that. And so if you go to participate in somebody's circle event or ritual, you want to ask ahead of time, if you have not been to this group before, if they work clothed or not. It's a valuable question to ask so you don't get surprised in the moment. But most will work with clothes on. It's very few that work without clothes on, and especially not with open circles where they're inviting people who are not normally in the group to come and participate. It's usually going to be closed circles where, or covens, the inner circle maybe, that will be doing that. People that have known each other for a while and worked together for a while. So you're usually not going to encounter it, but it does pay to ask. I would say I don't think that I have personally encountered that. My husband did, with a couple of the groups that he worked with, but I did not. And yeah, it's always good to know ahead of time whether that's the case. So you don't have to be afraid that it's always going to be that way, because it's not. And there's some reasons for that. One is Wicca was developed in Europe. I don't know if y'all have ever been to Europe, but around probably 8 or 9 months out of the year, it's cold. And most Wiccan groups and witches work outside if they're doing ceremony. So it's dang cold, and you don't want to just be outside naked in the cold in Europe. So it's also got to do with privacy. Do you have a place where you can work and not be disturbed if you're unclothed? And some people will work inside for that very reason. But yeah, it's just a matter of convenience. Now, most witches that I know who are not Wiccan, which is something different, and that's another Ask a Witch edition, do not do their ceremonies in the nude. Most witches are working on the fly, so it's just part of their daily life to be magical, and so they're not naked the whole day long usually. And so it's usually going to be part of a ceremony when that happens. And witches that are not Wiccan often don't use ceremony and call in the quarters and this sort of thing. So that's my experience. I'm not saying that's your experience or everybody's experience, but I've worked Wicca all over the world and witchcraft all over the world, and that has been my experience. So basically, ask before you go, just to be sure, if you're unfamiliar with the group. Usually they're going to say, no, we wear ritual clothing, but it's also appropriate to ask that question, because there's some groups that don't want you to come into their ceremonies in street clothing. They'd rather that you wore something ceremonial like a robe. So you want to ask, what is the dress for this event that you have invited me to, or that I'm coming to? How do I dress for it? And usually it's going to be street clothes or ritual clothes. So just be sure and ask. And finding out if they work Skyclad is something you can discern just from asking the question of how should you dress for the ritual. So the other part of that question is, do y'all have orgies, and do y'all have sexual encounters with each other in the realm of your celebrations? Now, I will tell you, most pagans, which is the encompassing umbrella of witches and Wiccans and druids and people who are of the earth and people who are usually polytheistic, most pagans, how can I put this, are a little more touchy-feely than your average person. Paganism, let's face it, was born out of the hippie revolution, and so there's a lot of thought of sexual freedom and sexual expression, and so honoring the goddess, this sort of thing. So there's a little bit more sexual expression than you might find in a Pentecostal church. There's also the idea that the god and the goddess come together and fertilize the harvest. And there's lots of other mythologies around that involve sexuality between the god and goddess. And that is sometimes enacted as part of the ritual, but rarely is it actually literally done. More often it's done symbolically with a knife and a cup. And so it's unlikely that you're going to encounter somebody having sex in the ritual itself. It's even more unlikely that you're going to encounter you being expected to have sex with anybody. Now, my husband was petitioning to join a group that he really liked. They were a British traditional group, so he liked the rigorous sort of structure of the group, and he was really into it until he found out that in order to initiate into the group, he would have to have sex with the high priestess, and female members had to have sex with the priest. And he wasn't down for that, so he ended up leaving the group. Now, I did not experience anything like that. This was before he met me. So I have not had that, but I know people that have run into situations where there's nudity and sexuality involved with the group. So that's something you'd want to ask also ahead of time. At the very best, what's probably going to happen is there are a lot of innuendos, and there's a lot of uh, like crude jokes and that sort of thing sometimes made, especially around Beltane. So people do talk about sex, so you might want to experience rituals with a group first before you bring your children, unless it's a family group and you know that it's, PG-13, or you're just not concerned about that. But the idea that we all have orgies all the time with our rituals is not the case. Usually, if you're having sex magic as part of your ceremony or your ritual, you're doing it with somebody that you are already in a relationship with, or you're in a closed group of just a few people that you know well and you've worked with for a long time. It's not usually going to be in the context of a public or open event. So you can feel safe and possibly disappointed that when you go to an open event that you would be attending, or a larger event, you're probably not going to run into anything other than a few bawdy jokes. So, and a lot of hugs. And if you are ever uncomfortable sexually with any kind of event, or if somebody wants to hug you and you're not feeling it, please, please, for the love of the goddess, don't. You are not obligated to even give anybody a hug if you don't want to get a kiss on the cheek if you don't want it. No amount of unwanted touching or intimacy should ever happen in the context of spirituality. So if you're not wanting that, be very clear that no is no. And if you want to express yourself further, don't be afraid to even put up a hand and say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Don't do that. To be quite frank, where I see this the most is with older men who are in paganism, who lived through the hippie years and did not get out of the idea that you can just reach out and touch any woman that walks by. And I got to be quite honest, I've had to put several in their place that I just didn't want touching me or on me. And a lot of my covens have had young women in them where we go to public events and I will literally walk with them past certain people who are known to not respect boundaries. So you want to quickly find out who those people are and decide if that's a deal breaker for you with working with this group or attending their events. So that's what I'm going to say about orgies and nakedness in rituals. Yes, it does happen. Usually it's in a very controlled small group. You might get a surprise, so be sure and ask if it's a group you're not familiar with. Y'all take care now. Okay. Bye-bye.